Hi, can you hear me? Okay, wonderful. Thank you all so much for being here. Really appreciate it. What a lovely full room. And the question before us, of course, is what does good CX mean when AI owns the journey? The good news is I'm not the star of the show here today. With me, I've got Andrew Hui, and I'm going to introduce Andrew and call him up to the stage. Andrew is an AVP at TD. Specifically, it's Enterprise Customer and Consumer Journey Insights at TD, where Andrew leads a North American team with stakeholders across Canada and the United States to deliver consumer insights. And Andrew's, the portfolio, it's a very broad portfolio. It spans brand, reputation, citizenship, sponsorships, ESG, product, customer experience and journey measurement, and research with diverse communities. And Andrew's had experience on the vendor side as well, having spent a decade as VP at Ipsos. Andrew Hui.
Thank you.
Please.
All right, thank you for having me.
So when we talk about CX in a world enabled by AI or a world powered by AI, there's really two sides to it. One, of course, is the delivery of CX itself, the creation and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of changes happening there around truncation of journeys, agentic AI, which is completely changing what self-serve means. Recently, Claude has been talking about, well, not Claude, but Anthropic have been talking about Claude dreaming. This is on the agentic platform, the managed agents platform, and so on and so forth. But the other side of all of this is the measurement and the governance aspect of it. And today we're going to speak more to that whole side of it, given your role in insights. So let me start with a very broad question. How are you using AI in insights gathering? And then we'll break it down.
Okay. We are relatively early in our AI journey, our usage journey, compared to perhaps some of our peers. So we only recently, even the past few months or so, actually got Copilot turned on within our ecosystem, which has been very exciting for us, and we've been finding very interesting ways of using it. But we've also been part of the AI conversation in the research industry for many years. And so we've been hearing about synthetic as an example. We've been hearing about AI moderation as an example, synthetic personas, that sort of work. Working at a bank, it's sometimes, and probably rightly so, actually, we have to go through a very specific sequence of steps before some of these technologies can be turned on. And so we've been working hard behind the scenes to convince our governance partners that we have the right controls in place, that we can use all these technologies in a very responsible way. So, we're using right now Copilot to help synthesize work. We are dabbling with AI moderation tools. We are exploring synthetic sample in terms of augmenting our sample sources.
Tell me about the governance bit. What I'm specifically interested in is where are the points of friction? Where are you getting the biggest no's or perhaps just questions? Let's interrogate this further.
Yeah. Some of the things that we raise, and actually I credit my team for raising these points ahead of our governance teams, things like intellectual property. And so we were pitched by a research agency partner probably about a year ago. And they said, hey, we have this new AI-enabled tool that helps evaluate concepts. I'm getting buzzed by somebody. And it does all these fantastic things, and it can do all these sort of neat sort of changes. And one of the questions we asked is like, okay, that's great, but when we submit our concepts to you, future product innovations to you, where does that information go? And in the previous world where the normative database was just a series of numbers and you didn't have the specific context and description of the concept attached in the database, that is an acceptable risk in the world of Gen AI being able to interrogate descriptors. Where the model is trained, where that information goes, where it lives, we don't want our ideas to be leaked into the marketplace accidentally just because that partner also happens to be working with one of our competitors. So that's one example of us bringing an idea into the governance team. They've been great at helping us write the right language to retain the right intellectual property. The other place that we've been experiencing it is when we're working with AI, we have taken a very deliberate approach. One of the things I say to my team is that our job is to represent reality. And one of the tricky things working with these AI tools is figuring out if they're actually representing reality or if they're just telling us something that we just want to hear. And so I'll give you an example where we did some executive dialing of some of our customers to understand why they were banking with a competitor. And what I did was I had all the senior executives kind of write their notes down into Word. We loaded them SharePoint, and I had Copilot synthesize the results. We also had created a separate fact base about this competitor. And so when I was creating the report, I didn't want to reflect what was already in the fact base. What I wanted to do was understand if the executives discover anything new through their conversations. And so that's the prompt I wrote in. Copilot came out with a list of 10 things, sounded on par, amazing. It's like, okay, now show me in the interviews where this insight is coming from. Copilot gives the usual answer. It looks like I must have misunderstood or something like that, and just like goes into that spiral of like, nope, can't find it. And so thankfully, I only had 15 of these things to re-review, and I started going through each of them, and probably half of those insights that felt really good did not exist, right? And so they got it from somewhere. They didn't get it from the interviews. And so there's a lot of checking that needs to happen, especially for research professionals, to make sure that the tools that we're using are actually reflecting reality.
Absolutely. And on the topic of reflecting reality, what you talked about, of course, was that whole, not necessarily hallucination, but it's drawing from sources other than the prescribed databases, not following rules, potentially an alignment problem. But you also mentioned synthetic personas. Tell us a little bit about that, but starting with, how are these personas developed? Because when we say synthetic persona, there's about 3 or 4 different things, quite different from each other. We could be talking about activated personas all the way through to digital twins of your customers. So what are we talking about? How are you using them? What's your experience been?
I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with synthetic personas and digital twins. I haven't in my shop yet found a really pragmatic way of using synthetic personas and digital twins. The idea that my business partners would interrogate these twins and come up with new ideas sounds interesting, but I think they also have day jobs and are worried about other dimensions as they're thinking about product ideas. This is not the only source of insights that they want, and quite frankly, they are still relying on the experts within the TD shop to provide some of the direction of where to go. I've been kicking around, though, the idea of using the synthetic personas in a slightly different way. And one of the big challenges working in a large organization is it's important to figure out how to persuade leaders to understand the decisions that you're recommending, to adopt the recommendations that are being proposed. And so I'm right now experimenting with creating a persona of myself within the organization. And so the idea here is, me as an AVP, can I create a digital version of myself so that my team can submit work and have my digital persona react to that content and provide feedback? So I'm looking at the problem from an executive lens. Many of their stakeholders are also going to look at the content from an executive lens. And so how do we use these tools as an enablement tool, right? How do we use the tool so that when the content reaches whoever's desk, it is already maximally persuasive, and the questions aren't so obvious that are going to come back. And there's nothing more frustrating than seeing obvious questions not being answered when you get a piece of content across the desk.
Now, you use the word digital twin. That's what you're trying to create of yourself. Where do you see the use of synthetic personas in research going? You said you have a love-hate relationship. And just for the audience, when I said, when we say synthetic personas, we can be talking about anything from my digital twin who would really live and breathe, well, maybe not live and breathe, but think like me, to an activated persona, which has my data, and would speak as though it were me, and at the two ends of the spectrum. Wanted to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, I propose there is another point, even a little bit further down on the spectrum. When I think about synthetic, I also think about the underpinnings of synthetic personas is synthetic sample, right? And I think that is a really interesting technology to understand and explore. One of the biggest challenges that we face is as we try to understand very specific customer segments. It can be so expensive to talk to very specific groups. One of the experiments that we're running right now in our shop is, can we close that gap and narrow the expense challenge by using synthetic sample? And I know in the industry, one of the conversation pieces that we've had is, how do we know that when I create something using synthetic sample, if it's actually, again, representing reality? I think there are actual ways for us to test that. And one of the ways that we're testing it is we're injecting it into our predictive models that are connected to specific business outcomes. And one of the things that we've seen is when we inject synthetic sample into the models, the predictability, which is as simple as an R-square or a correlation coefficient, increases significantly. And so to me, that tells me that the technology works. It is reflecting the reality that we see in an independent part of the business. And so how do we adopt it at that point? I don't know that we can have it generate insights without any training or anything like that. But it's really interesting to see the technology in action of how we can improve our predictive power of our models.
Now, you also mentioned using AI-powered qualitative interrogatory techniques. Where do you see the use case for that? Is it scale? What is it that you're hoping to achieve with this? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, again, I'm not 100% sure yet. I think part of it is scale. And so can we effectively generate quantitative, qualitative results, right? I think that's an interesting idea that we will experiment into. Is there a way for the AI moderator to detect patterns and interrogate as it goes through the experience with all the different participants, understand emergent trends, and dynamically sort of adjust the moderation guide and the probes into that? The question is, does it perform better than a skilled, experienced human moderator? And perhaps also it's not a either-or situation. Maybe it's an and situation, right? And so it is a tool that a real person will use and shape and control as it gets insights.
Now, the reason why I ask is, when I think of qual research, one of the biggest stumbling blocks, and of course at phase 5, and I should have introduced myself, I'm the Chief Innovation Officer, one of the partners, and I head up experience design. What we run into, and most of the work we do is B2B, is getting the participants themselves. It's not, like if I could get, for clients like the London Stock Exchange, if I could get 1,000 traders like that, yes, I would use AI-based qual moderation and so on. But that's the issue. How are you thinking about that?
And I think another challenge to that reality is, do the participants want to talk to AI, right? And so I've seen really great technologies that can mimic voices and cadences, and it just sounds so human-like. But there still is a sheen to AI that feels AI, right? And I think outstanding question for me is like, well, what is the quality of the insight that we generate using this technology versus the classic approach?
It's amazing you say that. A few weeks ago, I was invited to a meeting at MIT, and was shown demos. One of a well-known journalist, a broadcast journalist in America, and the other was a Johns Hopkins doctor. And we saw the AI versions of them in action, and it was just, you couldn't tell the difference. But I want to come back to this idea of interrogatory data, and I want to ask you about the tension between traditional insights gathering, what we are seeing in the age of AI. So far, when business has a question, any kind of question, they commission research, we go out, we do primary research. That's what I mean by interrogatory, whether it's quant, qual, we are asking you your opinion and whatnot. On the other end of it is recorded data and observed data, behavioral data and demographic, whatever, that as a bank, you're of course sitting on a full database of all kinds of data, and with AI's computational abilities, and the ability to take very scattered data points and create meaning out of it, has meant that suddenly all of these data that were sitting in SCADs unused can now suddenly be used, and there's a lot more interest in that. But there's compliance issues, there's scattered databases, sequestration, there's all sorts of things there. But I wanted to hear from TD's point of view, from where you sit, you're an insights, your job at the end of the day is to give LOB their insight. So where are you seeing this play out, interrogatory versus,
Yeah, again, I don't know that it's an or statement. I think it's an and statement. One of the things I like to say is the behavioral data can't really explain how people feel about things. It is a reflection of what people do, for sure. But I'll often give the analogy of, I could show you two pictures of two houses that had similar cars out front, and it'll be really difficult for anybody to say, that house is a house that votes Republican, that's a house that votes Democrat, right? It's just like getting to that level of precision using purely behavioral data is really, really difficult. The other thing that we're seeing in the modeling work that we do is that when we take the sentiment data and try to connect it to the behavioral outcomes that we see the models really, really shine. Like that, like connecting those two ideas together delivers huge explanatory power. If I think about my team and what we're supposed to do from a client-side perspective, from an insights perspective, it's not really interrogatory. Or it's not using necessarily the behavioral data as well too. Our job is to provide a predictive view into the future. And so I'm a bit agnostic on the data sources that are used to achieve that end goal. If I need to help the organization understand the consequences of the decisions on the table, part of it is going to require primary research, maybe syndicated research. Part of it is going to be connecting that research with the signals that we see from our very vast databases. I would caution folks as they work through and explore these technologies to, again, not think of these as either or, but they're and, right? It's like we just came through the whole trend of big data, and we thought, oh, big data is going to revolutionize our industry and it's going to put a lot of market research out of work. I don't think that has happened, right? And the reason why is that there is this natural physical limiter in terms of what data can actually explain. And so we need to have the sentiment included as well.
Absolutely. And but given what you said, so the primary research, going to humans, understanding, observing, however we do it, that's here to stay. Do you see changes, though, in the way in which one looks at the cadence, the situations, the discipline around data gathering, and so on? Where are you seeing the changes coming?
Yeah, from how we work with the technologies, that there are huge changes for us, right? And so as research professionals, getting comfortable with the idea of blending in behavioral data with our sentiment data, and you're the person accountable for that. You're not going to go out to an analyst or an analytics group for some of that information. You're going to be the person responsible for bringing those ideas together. The capabilities that emerge from tools like as simple as Copilot analyzer model, right? You can even begin getting at least the senses of what are the statistical relationships between all these different signals, how everything kind of fits together. So yeah, I see changes to the ways that we work. I see changes in terms of the expectations from our partners of what we should be delivering. And the tools that we work with will really enable that.
It's, I mean, one of the things we're seeing, for instance, when our clients are developing their own, or working with others, developing their own digital personas using things like the CX tracking survey as sort of a constant predictable feed of primary data refresh to feed the database, while they have an insights activator that they're using that is being constantly refreshed and fed, which is interesting. And I don't think anyone has quite hit the cadence, the normative cadence we're all quite exploring. Now there's about 8 minutes left, and I did want to give the audience the opportunity to ask questions. Okay, we've got two hands there. We've got quite a few hands. Let's start at the very back, sir. Please. Go ahead.
I think a mic is on its way.
I was curious, do you have a database that you use for hosting all of your customer feedback that you kind of analyze and keep your insights in? I don't know if you're familiar with a tool called Dovetail at all, or what tools and processes you use to house the information and insights, and then that's then used within the organization to make those decisions.
Yeah, so we have a significant data structure that is wrapped around a lot of governance. And so only certain teams have access to certain pieces of information, as they should. We got to make sure our clients' data are really, really protected. So we have data in different spots. What usually happens in our world is that we transform the data into either anonymized signals or aggregated signals, and then we bring them into temporary, effectively like a mini data warehouse that's stood up temporarily so that we can do some of the analyses across. When we find relationships, that's when we engage our analytics team that will work with governance partners like Model Risk, as an example, to operationalize any sort of like one-on-one, like semi-personalized sort of results to better operationalize the insights that we've learned.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm not familiar with the synthetic personas. I was just wondering if you could speak more about that and like where you locate that. Is that a program you're accessing, or is it something you created, and how you find those versus the ones that you create yourself?
Yeah, so our exposure to synthetic personas has really been through our agency partners, right? And so some of our agency partners will have their proprietary technologies and say, hey, if you feed us this amount of data, we can create these personas for you, and then you would access it through our web interface. We have not gone to that extent yet with that, because I've not really found a clear problem within the organization that would solve yet. I'm open to it. I'm open to hearing how other organizations are using it. I just haven't seen it yet myself. The example that I described is just a very rudimentary hack I made through using Copilot and using that existing technology. We do not have access right now to build agents in TD. Our governance teams have turned that off for us. I look forward to when they turn it on. I heard some of the other banks here might have access to it. I'm very jealous. But there, it's like a very simple hack where I'm feeding it content. I'm creating a training document, I'm building a separate prompt, and I'm providing my team with like these pieces of information that they can then use to review content. And so I think there's creative ways that we can use the technology we have, even though the access, I imagine, for folks across this room is going to be highly varied. I'd encourage folks to think about how can we create new things within the limitations that exist around us. There are probably surprising ways that we can actually do some interesting things. Arnie, I think you were going to say something.
No, absolutely. I just wanted to add to that. I think that's a very good way of putting it. And conceptually, I mean, the idea, of course, is to have a synthetic human being in place of a respondent. But how do you do that? This morning, I did a little experiment. I fed the AI model a pure raw SPSS data file. It did a k-means cluster analysis. It came up with segments. And then I fed it the stage to the qual transcripts. So it put a layer on top of that. It described the personas for me. And then I fed it, this was around tax and planning, I fed it a product concept. And I hypothetically said, imagine TD's doing this, CIBC's doing this, RBC's doing this. I differentiated things a little bit. What do you think the receptivity to this across these personas would be? And it gave me an answer, but which seems very polished and very good, and there were percentages and probabilities and so on. But one then has to ask, you are doing a lot of inference and a lot of extrapolation. Yeah. And on the other end of it, of course, if this were a true digital twin, that would be very different because it's constantly refreshed with behavioral data, interrogatory data. The twin is alive as opposed to frozen in a moment of time, albeit activated beyond that moment in time.
The example you just gave, if I think about how I would validate whether what you created was actually representing reality, you take those ideas, push them into a very simple concept test, and see if the results come in at least directionally aligned to what the prediction was. And so here again, there's an example of like how the folks in this room, what we can do is validate whether the technology actually works or not. Absolutely. And then once we have that understanding, we can perhaps figure out different ways to scale it.
Absolutely correct. This is definitely the time for those control tests, for prediction tests, for alignment. There were other hands raised. Yes.
I was really interested in when you said behavioral insight and sentiment analysis, when they come together, they really shine. Can you give an example of where you said behavioral insight is what they do, and you never really know what customers feel. Can you give an example without giving away too much of where those two come together?
No. How can I say this? Maybe I'll just say again, we track on an ongoing basis how people feel about certain products that we have. We were able to connect those feelings and understand into some point into the future how our sales were likely to perform with high degree of certainty.
And by the way, do you have a formal program of testing research predictions against actual behavior?
We don't have a formal program. Okay. We just have that's an interesting idea. Maybe I should stand up something. Right now, it's a more organic
feedback
process.
Loop for the retraining, and ultimately that's what it is. Stefan.
Are you saying that we're eventually able to bypass the why? It seems that technology in particular is increasing the speed at which we track what people are doing to the point of predicting what they will be doing in the future. But in our industry, the key question has always been, why are they doing what they are doing? And this is where primary research was always the answer. The only way is to ask you, why did you just do this?
And to the model I was just describing, the first question that came back was, what causes people to change their sentiment?
Right. And do we know?
Unfortunately, that
seemed like a good idea at the time. Well, that brings us, we seem to have run out the clock on this one, but I'm sure you'll find us hanging around the corridors. Thank you all ever so much.
Thank you,
Thank you, Andrew.
Arnie and Andrew.
Really appreciate it. Cheers.
Thank you.